You need to send someone right now. He installed that hideous metal monstrosity. It's ruining everything. The property values, the harmony, my view from the kitchen." Karen's screech echoed across the driveway as she clutched her phone to her ear, pacing back and forth like a drama queen waiting for her Oscar. Her voice quivered with rage, her face blotchy red, and her hands trembling like she had just discovered a raccoon living in her air fryer. I stood behind my new driveway gate, sipping iced tea, watching the chaos unfold with the calmness of a man who knew he had followed every law, every regulation, and every single HOA bylaw that Karen herself had forced on the neighborhood over the years. The 911 operator on speakerphone hesitated, clearly confused by the emergency being described as a modern gate assaulting the community's aesthetic soul. I nearly choked on my tea when Karen screamed, "It's an architectural hate crime. Welcome to day one of the gate war. A week earlier, the gate had arrived. After months of planning and saving, I finally upgraded my open gravel driveway to a custom sliding steel gate with stone pillars on either side. I added in-ground lighting, security sensors, and a keypad for friends and deliveries. It was sleek, black, modern, and surprisingly affordable due to an off-season discount. My house sat just outside the jurisdictional reach of the HOA, which meant I didn't need their permission for anything unless I voluntarily submitted plans. I had no intention of doing so. The gate was for privacy, protection, and frankly, peace from Karen's constant nosiness. I lived at the end of the cul-de-sac, but somehow Karen still found ways to walk her yappy Pomeranian down my side of the road twice a day, pretending to inspect landscaping while eyeing my porch. She hated change unless it was change she controlled. The day after the gate was installed, I caught her standing outside my property line, arms folded, sunglasses perched like a hawk surveying prey. Her lips were pursed so tightly it looked like they were trying to hide from her own face. Without saying a word, she walked away briskly, dragging her dog like it had committed the offense. I knew that look. Karen was preparing for war. Sure enough, that evening a neatly folded piece of paper appeared in my mailbox. Unapproved structure alert. Possible violation of aesthetic harmony was printed in Comic Sans at the top. I laughed for 10 straight minutes before realizing she had signed it as Karen M., Head of Neighborhood Unity and Vision. That wasn't even a real HOA role. I checked the bylaws again just to be safe. Nothing she wrote made any sense. My house wasn't under her command. Still, I framed the note and hung it in my garage under a sign that read, Karen's First Strike. 2 days later, she came knocking. Not metaphorically. She literally knocked on the stone pillar beside the keypad and demanded I open the gate. I buzzed her in out of curiosity. She marched straight up to the front porch with the dramatic energy of someone about to perform an exorcism. You can't just install something like this. You're destroying the visual consistency of the block. I smiled, leaned against the doorframe, and calmly said, "Good thing I'm not on your block, Karen." Her eyes bulged like she had just been slapped with a zoning map. She sputtered something about community cohesion and harmony, but I cut her off and handed her a highlighted copy of the county zoning regulations. I triple-checked everything. It's all legal, but feel free to double-check. She snatched the paper, glared at me, and stormed off, muttering something about calling the authorities. And then came today, the 911 call, her final meltdown. Karen stood there, flanked by her equally furious friend Tiffany, both of them treating my gate like it had insulted their ancestry. A few neighbors came out to watch. One brought popcorn. The police eventually showed up. 2 patrol officers who, based on their expressions, already knew what kind of mess they were walking into. Karen launched into a theatrical monologue about visual pollution and mental distress from mechanical noises. One of the officers asked, "Ma'am, are you reporting a crime?" Karen flailed her hands and said, "I am reporting a degradation of neighborhood culture, a threat to shared values." The second officer looked at me, then back at her and said, "Ma'am, we don't enforce HOA opinions." As they walked toward me to ask a few routine questions, Karen started crying, loud, dramatic sobs that had 0 tears but a lot of sound effects. She dropped to her knees on the sidewalk like she was auditioning for a soap opera reboot. They're ruining everything. First the fence, now this gate. What's next? Neon signs? A bounce house?" she wailed. Her friend patted her back while mouthing something to the officers about hormonal fluctuations. I kept a straight face as the officers approached, handed them my permits and inspection report, and explained the situation. They nodded, said I had nothing to worry about, and politely told Karen to stop abusing emergency services. One of them even chuckled when he saw the HOA complaint letter framed in my garage. The best part. As the officers were leaving, Karen tried to take a photo of the gate for her evidence folder, but in her rage, she tripped on her dog's leash and fell flat into a puddle. Her dog, seemingly used to this chaos, just sat down and yawned. I watched the whole thing from behind the gate camera feed. It was cinematic perfection. I didn't laugh. Not out loud, anyway. But inside, I was throwing popcorn at the screen like I was in a drive-in theater watching the climax of a dark comedy. What Karen didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Her tantrum had drawn more attention than she realized. Neighbors who normally stayed quiet were starting to question her leadership in the HOA. A few even texted me privately to say they supported the gate and were tired of her behavior. One neighbor who had once been fined by Karen for having excessively enthusiastic wind chimes sent me a thumbs-up emoji and asked where I got the gate installed. The quiet resistance had begun. Karen thought she was declaring war. What she had actually done was light the fuse of her own downfall. The next morning, the folded envelope slid through my front door like it had been tossed with fury rather than placed with care. I picked it up to find a self-declared violation citation printed on thick paper that reeked of expensive ink and delusion. It began with a dramatic statement about how unauthorized gate installations contribute to neighborhood decay, followed by a list of made-up infractions such as unaesthetic proportions and gate with menacing posture. The signature at the bottom read, Karen M., Chair of the Community Harmony Tribunal. I actually laughed out loud. She was now inventing departments within the HOA to sound more official. Attached was a letter demanding my attendance at a mandatory HOA compliance review session, set to take place at her house on Sunday afternoon. She even suggested formal attire. I debated whether to ignore the summons or attend it purely for the entertainment value. Curiosity won. I knew she couldn't legally force me to participate, but the thought of seeing what courtroom drama Karen could stage in her living room was too tempting. I arrived 10 minutes late, just to make a statement. As expected, her dining table had been transformed into a mock courtroom. There was a gavel, which I'm pretty sure was a repurposed meat tenderizer. Her husband Greg sat beside her, wearing a necktie and a name tag that said Legal Oversight. 2 other HOA board members sat on the couch, pretending not to be horrified. A few neighbors trickled in, clearly there for the show rather than out of loyalty. Karen began with a speech that was both long and painfully vague. She referred to me as the individual who compromised neighborhood cohesion and accused me of installing a structure without spiritual alignment to the community's design language. At one point, she even held up a color swatch book and waved it around, declaring that steel gray disrupts our earthy palette. Greg tried to chime in with legal terminology, but mispronounced half of it and once referred to a statutory gate clause, which does not exist in any real legal universe. When they finished their monologue, Karen asked me to respond. I stood, pulled a manila folder from my bag, and calmly laid it on the table. Inside were printed county zoning maps, photographs, my contractor's license, inspection approvals, and a letter from the city planning office confirming that my property was outside HOA jurisdiction. I even highlighted the HOA boundary lines in neon pink, just to be extra clear. Karen stared at it like I had just dropped alien hieroglyphics on her grandmother's quilt. Her eyes scanned the documents, and her smugness started to melt into confusion. Greg, in a last-ditch effort to regain control, claimed the bylaws override municipal boundaries when public harmony is at risk. One of the board members coughed to hide a laugh. Another neighbor raised her hand and asked, Karen, did you get approval for your backyard gazebo last year? Karen froze. Silence fell over the room. I watched a bead of sweat travel down her temple like it was escaping a bad decision. That gazebo was infamous. It had bright orange trim and solar lights that blinked like a Christmas rave. Everyone knew she built it without filing the required forms. Karen stammered something about emergency shade installation, but it was too late. The hypocrisy had been exposed. The meeting ended abruptly after that. Karen declared that further review would be required and stormed out of the room, dragging Greg with her like a malfunctioning legal Roomba. I thanked the remaining board members and headed home, barely suppressing a grin, but I knew Karen wouldn't let it go. Her sense of control was too deeply tied to her identity. Losing this battle wouldn't humble her. It would only make her more desperate. Later that evening, I found a stack of flyers in my mailbox. They were printed in all caps and featured a blurry photo of my gate with the words "Community Eyesore" plastered over it. Karen had apparently gone door to door trying to rally support against me. The flyer included a petition to remove unauthorized fencing structures from community-adjacent lots. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into the recycling bin with the same energy I'd used to discard a spam coupon. But the real comedy came the next morning when I walked out to find two neighbors, Jackson and Anna, standing by my gate. Jackson was pointing at the keypad entry system and asking questions about how he could get one. Anna said she'd been looking to install something similar but didn't want to deal with Karen's constant surveillance. I offered them both the contractor's number and warned them that if they moved forward, they should prepare for HOA drama. Jackson laughed and said, "Let her try." I've been waiting for an excuse to challenge her little empire. The momentum was shifting. People were waking up to the fact that Karen wasn't some guardian of community values. She was just a control freak with a clipboard and a superiority complex. But as predictable as her antics had been, I still didn't expect what came next. That afternoon, I received a message from another neighbor, Rachel, who had once been on the HOA board before resigning under vague circumstances. She asked to meet. We sat down in her backyard, and she revealed that Karen had been doctoring minutes from past meetings, inventing roles, and even misappropriating community funds to print those newsletters and flyers. Rachel said she'd stayed quiet for too long, but now, with so many people frustrated, she was ready to speak up. It was a turning point. Karen's little kitchen table courtroom had backfired, and now her dirty laundry was about to hit the community bulletin board. Still, knowing Karen, she wouldn't go down quietly. She'd dig deeper, spin harder, and lash out at anyone threatening her illusion of authority. And I had a gut feeling that this was just the warm-up. The gate wasn't the real issue anymore. It was just the spark that had set a very dry field on fire. Something bigger was coming, and judging by the look in Karen's eyes as she passed by my house that evening, she was already cooking up her next ridiculous stunt. 3 days after Karen's living room courtroom circus, things took a bizarre turn. I woke up to find a thin stack of papers taped to my mailbox with neon green duct tape. Across the top, in oversized font, were the words "Neighborhood Protection Petition." It claimed that my driveway gate was creating dangerous blind spots for emergency vehicles, and that it posed a psychological barrier between residents. According to the paper, I had until the end of the week to voluntarily dismantle the gate or face collective community action. It was so absurd I nearly choked on my coffee. But the kicker was at the bottom menace 12 signatures, except 2 were from people who had moved out months ago, and one was clearly signed as Bartholomew, which was Karen's dog's name. Later that day, I ran into my neighbor Diana at the mailbox. She looked sheepish and handed me a crumpled copy of the petition. "Karen came by yesterday," she said, whispering like we were in a spy movie. She said if I didn't sign, the HOA might start enforcing lawn inspections again. Diana had already been fined last year for having 2 garden gnomes. I told her not to worry and that the entire petition was meaningless. She relaxed a little but warned me that Karen had gone into full campaign mode, trying to weaponize neighborhood fear into a show of fake unity. It would have been laughable if it weren't becoming so disruptive. By that evening, I noticed something odd. My trash bin, usually empty by noon on collection day, was still sitting at the curb, opened, rummaged through, and left in disarray. I checked my driveway camera. Sure enough, there was Karen, creeping down the sidewalk at 6 o'clock in the morning, lifting the lid of my trash can like she was uncovering government secrets. She sifted through it using a pair of tongs, then carefully placed something in a Ziploc bag and strutted away like she had found gold. I reviewed the footage 3 times just to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. Karen was literally stealing garbage from my property, likely trying to find any document, receipt, or object she could twist into a scandal. I knew it was time to escalate, so I edited the footage with a few zoom-ins and slow-motion shots and posted it on a local neighborhood forum. The title: Karen Digs for Dirt, literally. Within hours, it had hundreds of views and comments, ranging from disbelief to popcorn emojis. Even the mild-mannered Mr. Chen from across the street commented, "I always wondered who kept leaving fake code violation warnings on my porch. Mystery solved." Karen didn't respond publicly, but I knew she saw it. The next morning, her car drove past my house 3 times, slowing down each time like she was waiting to see if I'd react. But she wasn't done. The following week, a brand new edition of the HOA newsletter appeared on every doorstep. This one was a 4-page special. On the front cover was a heavily edited photo of my gate, made to look rusted and covered in graffiti. The headline read, "The decline begins. One man's vanity project threatens all." Inside were fake quotes from anonymous residents talking about how unsafe and unwelcome they now felt. One quote read, "My kids can't even ride bikes past that thing without crying." I didn't know whether to laugh or be impressed by the sheer dedication to nonsense. Karen had turned her vendetta into an amateur propaganda campaign. But then came the most ridiculous moment yet. One evening, as I was relaxing on my porch, I heard a commotion from Karen's yard. Her dog Bartholomew was barking nonstop, and she was frantically shouting at her husband Greg. Moments later, she stormed over to my property line with fury in her eyes and yelled, "Your gate interfered with my dog's fence system. He's getting shocked near the sidewalk." I stood up and calmly explained that my gate didn't emit any signals and had nothing to do with her dog's wireless fence. She didn't want logic, though. She demanded that I turn off my device immediately. When I refused, she threatened to call animal control on me. That's when I revealed I had just installed a second security camera on the other side of my driveway, one that had caught her, the previous day, fiddling with the control box for her own dog's invisible fence. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video. Her expression dropped like a power outage hit her brain. She turned bright red, then pale, then red again. Without another word, she stormed back across the street. I uploaded that video too, titled it "Karen Breaks Her Own Fence, Blames Neighbor's Gate." This time it spread far beyond our neighborhood. It got picked up by a local meme page. The comment section was a battlefield. Half the people tagging friends with "This is Sue," hashtag OO, the other half begging for sequels. As the days passed, I began to notice a shift. Neighbors who previously avoided drama were stopping by, not just to talk, but to vent. Jackson installed a miniature picket fence and painted "Freedom Zone" on it. Anna, who had previously feared HOA retaliation, began organizing a casual backyard gathering to talk about community reform. Karen was losing control, and everyone could feel it. But the most unexpected twist came when I checked my mail one evening and found a handwritten note with no return address. It read, "She's been hiding a lot more than newsletter ink bills. Ask about the special assessment fund from 2 years ago." That was a deep cut. The special assessment fund had been a source of controversy, meant for street lamp repairs that never happened. Karen claimed the contractor disappeared with the money, but now someone was hinting at something bigger. I filed that thought away for later. First, I needed to finish dealing with her current nonsense. The next morning, my driveway gate operated as usual. I sipped my tea, waved to passing joggers, and waited. Sure enough, Karen came walking by, sunglasses on, holding her dog like a loaded weapon. She stopped, looked at the gate, then at me. I gave her the most relaxed, unaffected smile I could manage. She didn't speak this time. She just nodded at me, like a general acknowledging defeat on one battlefield while planning another. Then she walked off, not in a huff, but with a strange calmness that unsettled me more than the yelling. Because Karen quiet? That could only mean one thing. She was about to escalate again. I had just started to enjoy the silence when I received a thick envelope delivered by certified mail. It came with a smug little sticker that read, "Priority Legal." For a second, I thought Karen had tried to trademark neighborhood peace, but as I opened it, my amusement turned to disbelief. It was an official notice from the small claims court. Karen had filed a lawsuit against me. According to her handwritten complaint, my driveway gate had caused her severe emotional distress, community division, and physical and psychological harm to her pet. She also demanded compensation for property value sabotage and irreversible neighborhood damage. The total? $5,000, the maximum allowed in small claims court. She even included blurry photos of the gate from awkward angles, with dramatic captions like "The Barrier of Shame" and "Gate of Hostility." I blinked at the paperwork for a while, not sure whether to laugh or frame it. Then I did both. I snapped a picture and sent it to Rachel, the former HOA board member who had quietly begun helping me expose Karen's power-hungry antics. Her reply was instant. She's unhinged, but this might be her undoing. We met that evening and went over everything. Rachel brought her laptop, a folder of past HOA records, and something else, a copy of an email from 2 years ago detailing the use of the special assessment fund that was supposedly lost to a vanishing contractor. The email was from Karen to a local landscaping company, directing them to build a gazebo on her property. The payment amount matched the fund exactly. It wasn't just a moral breach. It was theft. I promised to use the court appearance not only to defend myself, but to set off a chain reaction. But first, I had to deal with the lawsuit. Court day arrived. I showed up dressed neatly, calm, and armed with documents. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she had been preparing for this since the Revolutionary War. She wore a dramatic navy blue blazer with gold buttons and carried 3 binders labeled Evidence A, B, and C. Greg trailed behind her with a rolling suitcase, looking like he would rather be at the dentist. When our case was called, the judge, a woman who radiated no-nonsense energy, asked Karen to begin. What followed was a theatrical performance. Karen stood like she was addressing the nation. She claimed the gate had transformed a previously welcoming driveway into an aggressive fortress, that her dog now refused to urinate near it, and that my security lights blinded her soul. The judge held up a hand and asked for evidence. Karen opened her binder and presented a set of altered photos, some so heavily filtered they looked like concept art from a dystopian video game. The judge frowned and asked, "Are these edited?" Karen hesitated. "There, enhanced for clarity." The judge didn't look convinced. My turn came, and I laid out everything. I presented the zoning maps, permits, city approval letters, security camera footage, and even a notarized statement from the contractor confirming the project's legality and harmlessness. The judge nodded, flipping through the pages with interest. Then I brought out a copy of Karen's fake petition, complete with the signature from her dog, Bartholomew. That got an audible chuckle from the courtroom. Karen objected loudly, insisting the signature was a misinterpretation. The judge ignored her. I calmly pointed out that the petition had been used to harass me, that Karen had trespassed multiple times, and that she had posted defamatory flyers and newsletters targeting me. The judge leaned back and took a deep breath. "This isn't just about a gate," she said. "This is a clear case of personal harassment masked as community concern." She ruled in my favor, dismissed Karen's lawsuit entirely, and ordered her to pay my filing fees. But the real bombshell came next. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Rachel approached the judge and handed over the copy of the email detailing Karen's misuse of HOA funds. Rachel explained she wasn't filing anything yet but wanted the record started. Karen overheard, turned pale, and stormed out without a word. By that evening, the neighborhood was buzzing. News of the courtroom disaster had already spread. I didn't even need to post the story online. Jackson from next door had live texted the entire thing to his bowling group, and someone leaked it to a local Facebook community page titled HOA Nightmares. The post exploded. Neighbors began openly criticizing Karen, and several demanded an emergency HOA meeting to discuss her leadership. A petition to audit the HOA's finances began circulating, this time a real one with legitimate signatures. Within 48 hours, it had enough support to trigger a formal review. Karen, meanwhile, went into hiding. She didn't come out for 2 days, and when she finally did, she avoided eye contact with anyone. Greg stopped wearing his fake legal advisor badge. The spotlight that Karen once basked in had turned blistering. People she once controlled with fear and bylaws were now laughing behind her back. Someone even put up a parody sign in their yard that read, "Caution, Gate of Doom ahead," with an arrow pointing toward my property. It became a selfie spot. Then, at the next HOA meeting, which was moved from Karen's living room to the community park to accommodate the crowd, Rachel brought the receipts. She revealed everything: the misuse of the special assessment fund, the forged HOA newsletters, and the made-up board positions Karen had been handing out to herself. The crowd turned from curious to outraged in seconds. Greg tried to defend her, claiming the gazebo was technically visible from the street, and therefore it served the community. But no one bought it. A vote was called. The outcome was unanimous. Karen was removed from all HOA positions, banned from serving on the board for a minimum of 5 years, in order to repay the funds she misused. She tried to protest but was drowned out by applause. Her voice, once the loudest in the neighborhood, was now a faint echo. When I returned home that evening, I stood by my gate for a long time, just admiring it. The sun reflected off the steel perfectly, and for the first time since its installation, there wasn't a single person complaining about it. In fact, someone had left a thank you card taped to it. Inside was a handwritten message: "Thanks for standing up to tyranny. We were all tired of tiptoeing." Karen might have thought her courtroom stunt would intimidate me, but it only exposed the rot she'd been hiding. And now, with her empire crumbling and the neighborhood finally speaking out, the war she started had only one possible ending, and it wasn't going to be in her favor. The final blow didn't come with a bang, but with an absurd spectacle that perfectly captured who Karen really was when stripped of all pretense. It started with a strange series of posts on the neighborhood message board. Karen, now stripped of all HOA power, began referring to herself as a community martyr and claimed she was the victim of a witch hunt orchestrated by anti-structure radicals. The posts were riddled with passive-aggressive quotes, Bible verses taken wildly out of context, and veiled threats about how some fences weren't meant to be built. Most people ignored them. Some laughed, and a few wondered if she was unraveling completely. I didn't respond. I had learned by now that Karen thrived on reactions. But just as I started believing she might finally slink into silence, she returned to center stage in a way no one saw coming. It happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard grilling burgers with a few neighbors. The air smelled of charcoal, and laughter filled the air. We had all agreed that things felt lighter lately, that without Karen looming over every flower pot and lawn decoration, the neighborhood had regained something it had lost. That's when Jackson burst through the gate, breathless, pointing toward the front yard. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to speak through laughter. I walked around the side of the house, and there it was. Karen had chained herself to the gate, literally. A full-length bike lock wrapped around her waist and the metal bars, with a folding chair, a thermos of herbal tea, and a handmade cardboard sign that read, "Defending the Neighborhood's Soul." She wasn't yelling this time. She sat calmly, sipping tea like she was on some protest retreat, quietly mumbling about historical preservation and civil disobedience. A few cars slowed down to stare. Jackson filmed it from his driveway. I approached carefully, not sure if I should laugh or call someone. "Karen," I said gently, "what exactly are you doing?" She looked up at me like I was the unreasonable one, making a stand. "This neighborhood has rules, and I will not be silenced." I blinked, confused. "You're chained to private property. You do realize that, right?" She nodded. "That's what makes it powerful." Greg, standing a few feet away, looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. The cops were called, not by me, surprisingly, but by a neighbor who was concerned Karen might dehydrate or, more likely, attract unwanted attention from local news. When the officers arrived, they paused to take in the situation before one of them said, "Is this the gate lady from the videos?" I nodded. They sighed and approached her with the same tired energy they'd shown weeks ago during the 911 gate emergency. Karen refused to unlock herself, claimed she was practicing peaceful protest. The officers gave her one last chance. When she refused again, they brought in bolt cutters. The chain snapped with a loud metallic pop, and Karen, looking defeated but still trying to appear noble, was escorted off the property. No handcuffs, no arrest, just an embarrassing walk back across the street under the eyes of half the neighborhood. The fallout was swift. The video of Karen's gate protest made it online by sunset. It spread faster than any of the previous ones. This time, people outside the neighborhood began commenting. News stations picked it up under the headline, "Local HOA Leader Removed, Chains Herself to Gate in Protest." Memes popped up within hours. My favorite was a cartoon of Karen dressed like a medieval knight guarding a castle gate, her banner reading "Aesthetic or Death." The national attention turned her into a spectacle, something she had never wanted. Karen thrived on control, on being feared or respected, but now she was a punchline. A few days later, the HOA held an open election to appoint new board members. Rachel ran for president and won unanimously. Jackson was voted in as treasurer, and Anna, finally brave enough to step up, took the role of communications officer. One of their first acts was to dissolve several of Karen's self-created committees, including the Community Harmony Tribunal and the Aesthetic Integrity Council. They also instated a transparency policy that required all HOA documents to be publicly available and every meeting recorded and archived. The mood in the room was jubilant. People clapped. Some even cried. It wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about taking back control from someone who had used a position of influence to bully and manipulate. To celebrate, the neighborhood organized an impromptu block party. Someone brought out a speaker system, kids drew chalk art on the sidewalks, and people shared food from their yards. As the sun set, a local band played covers of classic rock songs, and for the first time in years, there was laughter without tension. I stood by my gate, drink in hand, and watched as people took photos in front of it like it was a monument. Jackson jokingly made a historical marker out of cardboard that read, "Here stood the last dictatorship in the cul-de-sac." Someone else brought a cake shaped like a gate. It was cheesy, a little silly, but deeply cathartic. Karen didn't attend. Her curtains stayed drawn all evening. The lights in her house flickered once or twice, but she never came out. Word around the street was that she was planning to move. Apparently, Greg had put in inquiries with a realtor under his name, and the for sale sign appeared 2 weeks later. She left quietly one early morning, avoiding goodbyes. A moving truck came and went without fanfare. Just like that, the dark cloud that had hovered over the neighborhood for so long finally drifted away. After she was gone, things changed. Not just the mood, but the sense of possibility. Neighbors who barely spoke now shared meals. People started projects without fear of a passive-aggressive violation notice. Kids played freely, gates were built, lawns decorated, and a community that once tipped began walking tall again. And as for my gate, it remained exactly where I built it. Strong, sleek, unmoved. What Karen never understood was that her obsession with control only ever inspired resistance. Her efforts to impose uniformity backfired because people don't thrive under fear. They thrive under freedom. The gate had become a symbol not of division, but of the exact thing she tried to suppress: choice, individuality, and quiet defiance against petty tyranny. Months later, I was promoted at work. Funny enough, I now oversee regional zoning disputes and neighborhood planning appeals. The irony? People like Karen now have to plead their cases to me. I don't abuse the power. I follow the rules, unlike her. But every time I hear someone complain about a driveway gate ruining their view, I think back to that moment when Karen stood at my gate, calling 911 because she couldn't handle not being in charge. I keep the first violation letter she ever wrote me framed in my garage. Right next to it is a photo of the gate party, with everyone smiling, lit by string lights, holding drinks, and laughing beside the gate of doom. That's how the neighborhood remembers it now, not as a battle, but as the beginning of something better.